Hello, everyone. I hope you are getting settled in. We are going to take a couple of minutes and let people get into the webinar and get settled in. As we wait for others to join, just as a reminder, you're going to get the most out of this workshop if you have your resume open or a print version available. We hope you're going to be inspired. We think you're going to be pretty inspired to tweak it as you go and get some great tips for when you have time to look at it a little bit more in depth later. While we wait for others to join the room, we're going to pose a question to the audience. And that is, what is your biggest challenge or question related to your resume? If you don't mind dropping that in the chat, that'll be a great way to get us started. Take just a minute and let people hop into the room and respond to the
Perfect.
Right. It's the best way to format skills section. We've got a question about length. We've got a link to a resume. All right, well, we are getting started. It's such a pleasure to welcome everyone to our fourth session in this week-long Career Connection series from the National Press Club Journalism Institute. My name is Beth Francesco. I'm the Senior Director for the Institute. We conceptualize this week of learning as a chance for job seekers with any level of experience to fine-tune some of the key tools that employers and recruiters use to screen applicants. Today's session on revving up your resume is going to leave you with some great tips to address some of the challenges that you're mentioning in the chat. Before I introduce our wonderful instructor, Bailey O'Connell, a few housekeeping items. We know you're going to have lots of questions. Please ask them as we move through this hour. Don't wait till the end. Chances are somebody has a similar question. If we wait till the end, we may not get to it. You can use the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. Please check now that you have the panelists and attendees selected in the to area so that we can all see your great comments or questions. You're going to get the most out of the session again if you have access to your resume to spot check it or edit it as we move through the session. Being able to copy and paste some of your resume specifics, like some of you already have in the chat, will help Ms. O'Connell diagnose your issue if you're having one. And at the end of this program, I'll share a link to a survey as well as some information on an opportunity tomorrow for some additional coaching or editing time. Please stay tuned and don't log out immediately. I'm really honored to introduce our expert instructor for today, Ms. Bailey O'Connell. Bailey has been working with Creative Circle since 2007. She started her career in the Chicago office, where she worked to place numerous job candidates with opportunities with clients such as Walgreens and Dyson, just to name a couple. Bailey then moved to Washington, D.C. in 2011 to open Creative Circle's 12th office, supporting the D.C., Northern Virginia, and Baltimore markets. Creative Circle DC works with clients in the corporate, nonprofit, and agency space, placing candidates in media, communications, content, and design roles. Bailey reviews resumes and portfolios daily and is truly, truly a connector and helps talented communicators find their next role. We're really glad to have you with us today, Bailey. Let's dive into the complex world of resumes.
Absolutely. Well, Beth, thank you so much. I appreciate you asked me to work with the National Press Club and Journalism Institute. Always happy to offer suggestions, support, recommendations. And so when you had reached out to me to talk about revving up your resume, I came up with a presentation, which I'm going to share my screen in about 2 minutes. And just so wanted to kind of highlight kind of what I've seen happen, in my past almost 14 years with Creative Circle, what I've seen works, what I've seen can be tweaked in order to get a candidate recognized. So I'm going to jump on and share my screen right away, and we will get going. And as Beth said, this is definitely an opportunity for folks like yourself to ask those questions. We were having a conversation earlier. I know that when people are in presentations or Zoom conferences like this, we tend to get distracted, but I am happy to stop and pause and answer some questions along the way. So it's on top of everybody's mind, and happy to give advice as we move. So again, this is Rev Up Your Resume. And again, thank you so much for asking me to partake in this, this event. So happy to share what I know. What I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit more about Creative Circle. Beth, you did a great job. This is just kind of more some insight about what we've worked on throughout the years. We've been around for about, gosh, 18, almost 19 years. We are in 30 different markets nationwide. As Beth mentioned, I'm originally from our Chicago office, and then opened up the DC office going on, I think, 9 years. I can't believe it. So very interesting, very unique markets, to say the least. You know, my expectation of coming to DC was so different from having worked in the Chicago market, but I've learned so much about what there is to offer in DC and the clients that we work with. So really, we work on a variety of roles, specifically in, you know, kind of the design, art, content, copywriting field. So it really depends on what our clients are looking for. And essentially how the process works is that clients come to us directly and say, hey, who do you have that fits X need that we're looking for? And then that's when we connect and connect with candidates, prospective candidates, and kind of tell a little bit more about the opportunity and all that stuff. So that's really, you know, kind of the absolutely like bottom line of what we do. There's of course more things behind that, but just wanted to kind of give you an oversight of what we do. So a little bit more about me. As Beth had said, I'm the lead recruiter for the DC office. I really have had the utmost pleasure of working for Creative Circle for 13 years. It really has been an unbelievable experience. You know, one of the things that people ask me about my career is, you know, don't you get bored? Because what I do, I meet with so many different people that there's never a chance to get bored. So I enjoy it very much. And really, you know, my goal is to partner creative professionals in their job. And again, in the market, in the DC market, we tend to work with a lot of nonprofits and Fortune 500s and trade associations. So that's it. Fun fact, and I always like to add a fun fact to these because I think it's important. I did try out for Body Double and Poltergeist 3. I'm not sure if anyone even saw that movie. It did not get, first of all, I was not in it, did not get the part. But secondly, I don't think it did that well. But I say these things because it's part of my story. And the idea of a resume, it's part of your story. So I say these things because there are some unique tidbits that I would like to, you know, share with you that I think might be of interest as you are reviewing your resume and reviewing your LinkedIn profile. So first and foremost, I will tell you, I am not a resume writer. I would no more say that I could take someone's resume and rewrite it. What I do is look at resumes and offer suggestions and tips as to maybe how to better lay it out. What dates to include, how far back you should go, you know, certain key highlights that might be of interest to clients. So that's what I do. There are people around the nation that do this professionally in terms of resume writing. And if you ever want to find someone to do that, you know, let me know. I can probably find someone for you, but I do know that there are people out there that do this professionally. So one thing to note. So here we go. I found this quote, and it's been attributed to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I loved it. Keep it tight and get it right. And if that is something that I really, when I'm looking at resumes as well as portfolios, is that it's very true. It's very apropos. One of the things that people forget is that in person, we only have about 10 seconds to impress someone. So your resume should be designed in a way that's easy to read and makes a positive impression in actually less than 10 seconds. To give you an example, when I'm reviewing a resume, I probably will look at it for no more than maybe 5, maybe 10. I'll tell you, that's pretty long. Because I'm looking at a couple things. I'm looking, yes, at layout, but I'm also looking at uh, chronology. And I'm also looking at, of course, punctuality and typographical errors. So if I see something right away, I'll move on. So that is something that I encourage everyone who is redoing the resume or zhuzhing it up or adding or taking away things is to triple, quadruple, you name it, double check multiple times, and share it with as many people as you can. Just so when someone is reading it that might not know your entire background, that once they see what your resume is all about, they'll understand your background, your experience, and where you kind of want to be in your next part of your career. Um, so I wanted to kind of highlight in this, and this is something that a lot of people ask me about, is really where to trim the fat, um, and why to trim the fat. It's really so you can make it easy to skim. And I look at it in a couple different ways. So one of the things that I always look at is like career highlights or personal profile sections, which are usually at the top. Now, what I implore candidates to do and individuals to do is think about the length. You don't want it to be half of your resume. You want it just enough to encourage the reader, to engage the reader to continue down the page, right? So I think, if you have some really great highlights, some great, notes of honor, where you've been published at the top, I think those are very important. And then I go down to the current employer. I think one of the things that I've seen lately, and it's fascinating, is that I've seen people not put their work experience in chronological order. And I'm not sure where they learned that, because I know I never learned that, but for some odd reason that, we see that people are kind of taking liberties and starting from the bottom, and then, starting from where they started and then going down. That will lose people's interest right away. So I immediately say your current work experience, your most recent work experience goes on the top. If you've worked with a company or a client, that should be front and center. How long you've been there is also great. I know there was a question in the chat. It was about how far back you should go. That is a fabulous question. What I've seen and what I've seen works is, I have seen people go back maybe 10 years, and then at the very bottom, they'll say, please, for additional years of experience, please review my LinkedIn profile, and we'll have the LinkedIn profile there. Because the LinkedIn profile, you can, that tends to be more of an elongated version. I thought that was a brilliant idea, because it's showing that, maybe if there's a disconnect from where you graduated to where you are now, that there's maybe some years of what did you do before that, or in between that, what did that look like? It's also a good reason. There's another good reason to use that too. Let's say you switch careers, or you're moving from one industry to another. That's also another opportunity where you can share that you have been in the workforce for X amount of years, but you don't need to go back to if you were working in the service industry and now you're working in the nonprofit environment. Because if you still want to continue in the nonprofit environment, the service industry doesn't have much, there's not much, it's not, it doesn't resonate as much, right? So that's another good reason to use kind of that additional, if you'd like to see my, full work experience, please review my LinkedIn resume. Another really great point is that we do talk about this kind of in recruiting. It's funny, but numbers really don't lie. And this might not be very applicable to, journalism but then it can. I'm thinking about it as I'm saying it, or writing. But really, what we use that is any sort of metric, because what we found is that clients really like to see, I guess, wins, right, for individuals. So it can be done, whether you're a designer, it can be done whether you're a social media writer, it can be done if you are a blog writer and you got, 300, hits on a blog for a certain organization, right? So think of it as if you have, some ideas of stats and figures that you might be able to input into your resume to kind of, let clients know that your writing and your skill and ability really has, you know, you're strong to be able to bring readers in. You know, maybe like, again, you've won awards, you've provided, you know, content or written content that, you know, was kind of never shared with the industry before. Anything that can, again, just highlight certain projects that you've worked on is really important. Um, and then I also encourage candidate, and this is regardless in what field, any field that you're in, is that customize your resume. And I say that because just like we as individuals are unique and we have our own nuances and we have, you know, outside experiences that might parlay well into our you know, real world work. Each opportunity is unique. So don't be afraid to customize your resume to kind of suit, you know, what that position is looking for. You know, I'm always asking candidates, you know, give me 3 points based on what our client is looking for as to how your experience and your knowledge would relate to this role. Because what that does, it does a few things. It shows me that you're very interested in this role and you want to, you know, find out more about it, and you would love, you know, you want to engage with the client and kind of get a little bit more details. But it also shows that you're taking the time to look at this role, really get an idea of what they're looking for, and match up your current skill set and experience as to what they would be looking for. And that's really, I think that is probably one of the biggest things out of these three that I also strongly push for. One of the things that I don't know why it was in here, maybe because this is an updated version, but I did want to talk about pictures on people's resumes. So it's been a really interesting kind of should I or shouldn't I, because I would say 90% of the people that I am linked in with have their picture, right? So any employee can go see, you know, what I look like, or any employer can go see what I look like, and I'm fine with that. What we find on a resume, it's a little bit easier, and even though it's completely wrong and, you know, really within the culture of any company should absolutely be frowned upon, but we really face that you know, that kind of hurdle of, you know, anything that falls under the diversity, equity, and inclusion umbrella that we are trying to combat. So you know, and that again is my personal opinion. So I will definitely say that up front. But you know, I never, I feel like we need to not let a client, excuse me, have any reservations or any hesitations because of, you know, an image on their website. So that is definitely something that, you know, I wanted to bring up. Was there any question while we are on this page that I might be able to answer and slide in?
Sure, Bailey. We have a
Yeah,
couple of questions that
sure.
are pretty specific to resumes. So
Okay.
we have, you know, you've talked about how we should customize our resumes to suit the job and to suit, you know, our experiences. Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of using a template? You mentioned that visually, you know,
Yeah.
the design has to be appealing, but
Yes.
talk about the pros and cons of using a template from Word or from, you know, on Canva or whatever a candidate might be using.
Absolutely. So and I apologize. I know, Beth, I wanted to find a resume that did not work. And I actually lately have every resume that I've seen has actually looked pretty good. So, but I think where we find where resumes don't work is that if it's more than 2 pages long, to be honest with you. I mean, because the whole idea of scrolling down, we lose, we just either, really what happens is our clients lose interest. They just they're not going to focus on anything past page 2, sometimes even page 1. So, and that gets me back to kind of trimming the fat. And then in terms of using a template, I'm all for it. I think, but keep it muted. You know, when it's interesting, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of designers, and some designers have one of the most cleanest, really strong typography, really, talks, doesn't really talk a lot about their projects because really that's saved for their portfolio, but it's very clean, it's very well written, it's very concise. I've also seen designers go on the flip side and add so many overwhelming visuals that then it's almost to the point where I don't even know where to look, right? So I don't even know where to look in terms of their experience. And that can be detrimental because maybe I'm missing out on a candidate that's, worked for a top organization that a competitor is looking to work with, right? So it's really like keeping it very clean, very concise, but mute it a little bit. We use actually Canva, for our own purposes when we are recruiting candidates. So we find that is a very nice, template to use. We also definitely incorporate like our own branding, right? So it's very, while it is definitely a Canva template, we have customized it to be able to, that looks like it's coming from Creative Circle. So I think that's great. And if there's one other thing I can add while we're having this conversation is, as I said, each individual resume is, tailored to that individual person. If you've ever thought about branding yourself, now is the time. What I've seen is that a lot of people whether it be in design or whether it be in content writing and development, they have come up with their own brand. So it's consistent throughout their resume, their portfolio, or any other kind of communication, right? So, excuse me. So that's also something to think about. I would also say, there's one other tidbit, and I'll get another question. One of the things that I've also seen candidates do is that they really focus on work that they absolutely love. It's like their passion work on their resume, which I think that's great. However, that might not be what the client is looking for or what the prospective client or agency is looking for. So what I do recommend is really being sure that you add in work or incorporate experience that would be kind of easier to present to a client than maybe more passion projects. I know I've had clients look at resumes and they say, "Oh, this looks like a lot of passion work," and so I step back and ask a little bit more ask more questions about that, and they basically said, "It's like this is the work that they want to do, but this is the work that we don't do. So I don't know how we're going to cross. I don't know how we're going to, I don't know how we'd match up." So again, that's something that you can kind of review, and that's where it gets into kind of reviewing that job and aligning yourself with that specific opportunity. If that, I wanted to offer that as kind of another solution. So sorry, there's any more questions.
There are lots of questions. Okay, so Jean asks, what do you suggest when your best experience, whether that's the most substantive, senior, is many years back? Jean says, the weakest thing on my resume is my most recent position.
So that's a great question. So what I say to that is, while your weakest is at your most recent and your best, or what you feel, because clients might not think that weakest is your weakest, right? And what you feel is your best is on the bottom. Is that, again, going in from a chronological perspective is very important, but the idea of a resume is really to captivate your audience, right? So, again, you have limited time to be able to do so. When you get that interview, when you get that conversation, feel free to open up and talk about, this is what I've been doing, but let me kind of, tell you a little bit more about, what I love to do, or what some of my, personal projects are, because that adds a little bit of it adds two things. It adds your, your professionalism, but also adds a little bit of a personal flair. Like I said, we all have our own individual story, and that's what you're contributing to. And in the end, a client or a company or an organization does want to know more about you personally, as they are going to be engaging you in their team, and they want to, make sure that everyone is, it's a good fit, right? So I would probably keep your resume the way it is, but don't hesitate to bring that up, in a conversation, because it just shows that you are passionate about certain projects, or or even would like to get an opportunity to work on another project like that.
Excellent. We have some more questions.
Sure.
So someone asks, should I include references on my resume or links to my work?
Yeah. Yes, and sort of. Well, let me start with sort of. Yes, references. Not necessarily. And I'll tell you why. Because, and this is what this is what I found within my experience at Creative Circle. I think it's very nice that individuals are willing to be kind of on-call references. But what you also don't want to do is just assume that they're going to want to do that all the time. Because I know as an organization, we definitely respect our candidates' references. Even if they give us permission to call them right away, we will let them know that we're going to call them right away. So that's why I'm a little hesitant on automatically putting the references on, because, people might just, we've seen strange cases where people just might call them and just find out more about you without your knowledge. And I personally would not feel comfortable about that. But if you're afraid that it's slowing down the hiring process, don't be afraid. That's not, if that's slowing down their process, then that's probably not an organization that you should continue with, because really it's about you, and then the references come after. So I probably would avoid that. And then the second part of the question, I totally apologize. It was
It was on
the links.
To work from the resume.
Yes. Well, then, hey, you know what? This is a good transition. So I'm going to bring it to the next slide. So this is, I did add portfolio tips for candidates. And again, this is, when I was writing these, they can be used for designers, for writers, anybody, right? So digital. That's all I can tell you. And I say that when I say digital, I mean using like a WordPress platform or CMS, or building your own site or a Squarespace. Because what we're finding is that even with candidates, if they have, maybe printed copies and they're scanning them, it doesn't have the same snap as a full blown digital portfolio. So there's a lot of options out there to take advantage of. A lot of them are free. So, definitely do that. Also, in terms of the links, and this might be hard with folks in the journalism and writing side, because there is a lot of information that you've written for, but I would try to avoid the overpacking urge. And I say that because really be selective and choose the works that best represent a well-rounded version of your work, exactly like what it says here. Tell them what time it is, not how to build a grandfather clock. And what I mean by that, if you have different forms of writing samples, for example, if you've written blog content for corporate communications, maybe have 4 samples of those. If you've written technical writing, 4 samples of those. If you've written any short form, like, social media writing, email marketing, any of that, a couple samples of those, right? So that you're not inundating someone to go through massive amounts of links and samples and stuff like that. Again, just showing them kind of the well-rounded version of what you can bring to the table. And then lastly, and this happens a lot, more than I thought actually, is that really double check to ensure that whatever your links are included on, they can be included on your resume, included on the portfolio, but that they are working. I know I've gone through a couple, even just this week, I've got, people have sent me hey, I'm interested in this job, check out my link. Excellent. I get excited and then nothing comes up. So definitely test it. Make sure it displays on all web browsers if possible. If it's mobile, even better. I mean, I find that clients are responding to me from their mobile all the time. So that means that they're really only looking at information mobily. So definitely focus on that. And then, if there's any, for example, this is more on the web side, if there's any web content that you've written for a specific client, add that specific link. I think those are great. So these are, again, just some helpful hints on the portfolio side, but feel free to put them on your resume. I've seen it where candidates have put maybe if they worked, let's say for USA Today, and they had their specific stories or bylines that they wrote, they'd put all the links right under where they worked. That's fine too. But if you have a kind of a one-stop shop of johndoewriting.com, even better, because then you're able to kind of get everything in one spot, so a client can be able to kind of look around.
Bailey, along those lines,
Yeah.
we've got a couple of questions from our participants
Sure.
that kind of go toward reframing the experiences that they've had so that they can try to get work in a new career. So Bailey asks, how do you morph your resume to match a new career path? For me, journalism to TV production. Or
Gotcha.
for others who are shifting from journalism to maybe a PR or communication role. So how do you reframe
Yep.
to make it appealing to a new industry?
Absolutely. So first of all, Bailey, I love your name, and it's so great to hear another one is out there. I love it. So what I say to that, and full disclosure, that can be a hard transition. I'm not going to sugarcoat it by any means. But what I say to that is, if you don't have that experience in that new industry, so let's say from journalism to PR, the line to get there is very short, right? So what I encourage candidates to do is to partner up with, if it's a friend, if it's a nonprofit organization, if it's going on Upwork, and offering your services as a PR communicator to that organization. I will tell you, you will not only get the experience that you need to get into more of a PR agency environment, but you'll also be able to use that as real world work. And it's like the barter system, right? So if you can, kind of, provide your services to a client, what you're getting in return is career development, different career exposure, and being able to transition into a different environment than where you're coming from. So I definitely encourage that. And there's online resources, like I said, Upwork is one of them. But also, I've talked to candidates who were thinking, I really want to get into writing blog content for I'm trying to think what the organization, it was for a nonprofit. I don't remember I'll have to go back in my records back here, but essentially it was a nonprofit. There was a cause that they were very interested in, but what they wanted to do is really get their feet wet in terms of blog and blog content writing, to be able to showcase what this nonprofit was doing, but then be able to use that to then share that with another organization. And that's exactly what it does. It's all about kind of, learning from each other and then garnering that experience to be able to move on to the next role. Does that help?
That's great. That's good. Another question that we have is, again, Bailey says, yes, that's exactly the answer that he needed.
Good.
So that's good. one of the things that this goes back to resumes a bit, but it does get to work samples and displaying, like showing your work. You mentioned, being able to use metrics. There has been some discussion in the chat about, for journalists, they may not have access, depending on their organization, they may not have access to some specific metrics that straight to their work. So what are some other ways that they can kind of benchmark what they've done? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because you're right, because sometimes you don't have access to that. I think you, in those cases, those instances, you would not put anything on your resume that would reflect that, but it would be more of a conversation, right? So it would be more of, I don't have access to those analytics or those key metrics. However, what I had, found out, was that this article, garnered, was put in, 50 other publications, and, or whatever, information you can maybe glean from what you'd have heard. But if you don't feel comfortable putting that information in there because you're not, the client either did not disclose that information, which I always say, ask a client for any sort of permission that you can get, because if you did the work and you were responsible for the work, that it's important that you also get credit for it. So I am always one to tell candidates, ask for permission. And then, of course, our clients that are going to say no. But there are ways around it in terms of disclosing that in a conversation or in an interview, where you can say, I can talk a little bit more about kind of the outcome of this article or the outcome of this, content that I wrote. So I'd probably go at it that way. It is, like I said, it's always a hurdle when clients are, to have maybe a confidentiality clause or an NDA. But, I think if you can speak to some of that in person, that works just as well.
Great. And then this is another question related to framing. We've got a lot of those. But you mentioned, you've got that 10 seconds to grab somebody's attention. And so maybe you hook them with the first, skills area, however you're framing that. We've got people who, what kind of impression does it make when you've been with the same employer for, let's say, 18 years, you've had progressive responsibilities, leadership roles. You've worked in one place for a long time. I know that's not as common anymore. And then on the flip side, you've got the potential for a candidate to be at a place, a couple of years, then go to a new place and go to a new place. So, what are the first impressions when you've got those two scenarios, and how can those candidates frame that experience in a way that is appealing to a potential employer,
to a client? Those are great questions, because you're right. It's almost like a flip flop, right? It's like, someone's stayed somewhere for so long. Oh my God, that's a bad thing. But then someone is flipped around so many times. That's a bad thing. I don't think either of those are a bad thing. I've been with my organization for, 14 years. So I think it's a great thing. But I do think I guess what I would probably, my insight or my advice for that, I just now learned that word, would be to really, look at it like, again, how I look at, my career is every day is a different day, right? So if I am going to be at an organization for X amount of time, it's not the same old. And so if you are able to kind of relay that, I know it's a little hard to relay that in a resume in kind of a black and white format, but just, again, it's where things have come across. If you've, been a continual award winner, or you've been recognized within your organization, or you've had, an opportunity to interview, a highly recognized, individual in the political space or in the science space or the art space, right? So anything that you can kind of add to, that longevity, that I guess what I say by that is that it shows forward movement. It shows movement within the organization, whether you've been promoted for it or whether you're continuing to challenge yourself. Let's say, you interviewed someone that's, kind of not necessarily recognizable, and now you're interviewing, you know, the head of Under Armour. So it's that kind of idea of within that time frame that you've been with that organization is that continual moving forward. And then on the flip side, in terms of moving on to different jobs, I really take those with a grain of salt. I don't look at it as, oh, they're a jumper. I look at it as long as again, it's all about forward movement. I look at it that way as opposed to, oh, are they going to be, are they going to be here for 2 years and then move on? Or are they going to be here for 6 months and move on? And that actually gets me to a point in terms of your resume, how to word that, because sometimes people, and a lot of our candidates are what we call contractors or freelancers, right? So they are continually moving on from job to job. So if you, to kind of explain that a little bit better to a potential client, what I recommend is dividing up your resume into freelance experience and work experience. Work experience is somewhere where you are a full-time employee at a company or a client. You spent, X amount of years there. You had X amount of deliverables. Freelance is exactly what that means. It's kind of projects that it's deliverables that you've worked on. So that will let that reader know, oh, they're not jumpers. They've, had some pretty consistent work, professional work, not professional, but work experience, and then decided to, make that move as, a freelancer, which in a lot of cases is extremely successful for people. So in either scenario, it just shows that you're continuing working, you're continuing moving forward. So I wouldn't let those be hurdles or major concerns, because again, it's what you can bring to the table to that specific client.
Fabius has a follow-up question to that, and that is, what if the work experience is not journalism related? So in this case, if you're trying to target work in the journalism industry, would you put the other work experience first? Because
that's a really great question. So again, getting back to the whole bartering scenario, if you don't have a lot of journalism experience, either you can get it through freelance or anything, or partner up with an organization that could use it, right? And then you're kind of building your kind of freelance pool or freelance portfolio. If you don't even have that right now, what I would do is definitely include an objective statement at the beginning, or just to really kind of set the groundwork that I have work experience, but this is where I want to go. And if you have an objective statement of kind of where you want to move forward in your career, and then maybe really to kind of drive that home in terms of visuals, I'm thinking of it as like looking at a resume right now. I would then put your samples of that journalism work first, and then go into work experience. Because again, you want to be consistent with moving. Again, it's all about moving the needle to where you want to be. So if you put the work experience before where you want to go, people might get, like, clients might say, well, they're in the service industry. Why? I don't understand what they want to be in journalism now. Like, how does that transition? You're helping them read through the transition of why you want to be there.
That's great. And I know you've got some additional slides to get through, so I don't want to skip that. But one person, one person did ask, it might be a little off topic, but can you talk a little bit about how cover letters and resumes work together to tell your story?
Yeah, great question. So full disclosure, Creative Circle does not look at cover letters. I mean, I absolutely never look at a cover letter at all. but clients do. So what the cover letter is, it is definitely, I've seen cover letters that are entire pages long. I will tell you, don't like it's just, it's overwhelming, because then now we have to then look at the resume. So I think of them as just really, really brief snapshots of your professional story, whether it be you know definitely, the initial kind of statement should be that you're expressing interest in the particular role with that organization. And something to note, triple check that, because there's a lot of cover letters that I get that say I am very interested in working with uh, you know, uh, creative group, which is our direct competitor, on this, whatever role. So double check your audience first and make sure that you get that right. But then what I would do is that's, the cover letter is really, again, it's more of like a metric key highlight based, as opposed to your entire work history. Again, think of your entire work history as something that you'll be able to speak about in person. This is just truly to get people to take an additional 10 seconds to want to make that conversation happen. So I would probably, really keep it, again, very short and sweet, and add some relevant, recent, and again, specific highlights that would attribute your experience, to that active role.
That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me just take a little drink. Sorry, I'm getting a little, um, parched. Excuse me. So I wanted to just continue, and again, we can continue our conversation. Excuse me, more questions. But one of the things that I wanted to share with everybody is interviewing virtually. This has been this is our new norm. To give you an idea about Creative Circle, we were never, ever, ever, ever a virtual company, ever. So when, of course, the pandemic happened, that flipped us on our heads, and we had to figure out how to work Zoom and how to work our technology and make sure the dogs aren't barking and kids aren't running in the room. So I just wanted to kind of add some information about that and what we found, because now that's all we do is we interview candidates, and I love to interview candidates in person. That was like one of my favorite things, because it's one-on-one time that I get to have with candidates to get to learn more about them and what they do and where they want to go. But now we do it virtually. So, and I'm happy to do that as well. So wanted to just give some insights in terms of what I've found that are successful. So take a deep breath. As we all know, I took a deep breath getting on here before I got in here with Beth and everybody. So definitely take a deep breath. Virtual interviewing is a little bit, even though you see that person, and as you can tell, I use my hands a lot. You're missing that nuance of kind of human contact and interaction. So with that comes maybe a little bit of stress and anxiety. So I always encourage every candidate just to take a deep breath and go in, and you'll be great. Definitely make sure technology is working. I was having some technology issues even before I got on here. So, and also try to make sure that other devices are muted, that your background isn't too distracting, that, your emails are off, that your text messages are off, because, one thing to note is that clients, they're taking time out of their day to connect with you and get to know you. And that's what they want to do. So I always take it as a privilege when I am, meeting with candidates, because I know that we're all busy and we have all the things going on, but knowing that I, am able to do that with candidates, it's something that I really take, to heart. So, but I also hope they feel the same way about me. So I think that's important. And I think this is really important. An interview is an interview. It really is, regardless of the format. So, be on time and definitely turn on your video. I think I've met with candidates that don't feel comfortable And what that says to me is that how can I then present them to a client if they don't feel comfortable with me, which I am kind of the first line of defense to get them in front of a client. How do I know they're, how are they going to be in front of my client? So I think it's very important that, if you practice being on video, what I've learned is that, on Zoom, I can take myself off. So I don't even see myself on Zoom, which is great because that can be distracting. But definitely be present. Absolutely be present. Number three, yes, we are all human. So it's, things are going to happen. Before you all jumped on here, I had 2 dogs madly barking, and I said, we need to put them in a crate right now. So things happen. So, but prepare for that, right? And then also because of virtual, because we're all virtual these days, we are finding in the interview process that clients are asking for more interviews. It might, before it was maybe max of 3. We're seeing now anywhere between 5 to 7 additional interviews. And I think that's happening because they want to get more people involved. Because again, we are working virtually, and when you're in an office and you're interviewing with the company in the office internally, sometimes they'll take you out and have you meet with other team members, and that would be maybe the 3rd or 4th interview, right? In this case, we don't, some in certain scenarios right now, until we're all back in the office, until offices feel comfortable with that and individuals feel comfortable with that, we're finding that clients are asking for more virtual meetings with other team members. So so don't get discouraged that, oh my gosh, here I go again. I just think that's right now, that's going to be kind of the norm, because they want to make sure that you, even though you're maybe not going to be working directly with the person on the other end of the hallway or the other end of the office, that if we were in office, there would be interaction there. So I think that's kind of what we are assessing and finding, because they just want to really get to know the candidate and make sure that they're a good fit. So anyway, so this is my Q&A page, but again, we're going to answer some more questions. I wanted to provide some additional resources. Our creativecircle.com, we have career resources. This kind of breaks down some, information that we provided in terms of, I believe there's resume information, there's portfolio information, even more interview information. And then we also do have a Creative Circle blog, which is really great. So we create our own content, but we also work with outside freelancers who have come up with some really great content, whether it be, again, how to work virtually, how to avoid burnout. I think that's what we're finding, while we all went remotely, which is great. We found that people are working more hours because they don't have to commute. They don't have to be in an office. They don't have time restrictions. So with that means burnout. So there's some really nice, articles on our blog and talks about multitasking, things like that. So I recommend anyone to take a look at those, and those will definitely be some good resources for you. So again, thank you. I appreciate your time, and again, happy to stay on and answer some additional questions, but just really have enjoyed, presenting this information to you and National Press Institute. So, happy to offer any other answers to some questions if you got some.
Thank you, Bailey. Yeah, we have a couple more,
Sure.
and I'm going to stay off camera. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you can be the star. We have a couple more questions. I do want to ask that our participants hang on just a little bit longer, because I want to make sure you get some key information and an opportunity that's coming up tomorrow. But we have a couple of questions, one from Linda related to interviewing. And I'm so glad that you brought up interviewing, Bailey, because, we want all of these great resume tips to lead to an interview.
Yes.
So thank you. Linda asks, are there any interview questions that consistently come up that candidates should be prepared for, particularly at the senior level?
That is a great question. I would say there's probably 2 that I tend to see. And these are actually 2 that we also ask internally to potential candidates that want to work for Creative Circle. I think it's always important, no matter what level, but mostly on a senior level, is your leadership style, but also challenges and how you overcame them. It could be a situation, it could be a scenario, because again, I think it's important that a client knows if they're bringing someone in on a leadership role, that they really have um, the foundation to be able to manage challenges, to overcome challenges, to come up with solutions. If they don't have the solution, come up with a workaround. So I think those are two really good questions. I think another good question actually that I wanted to mention too is what has been and this can, and again, I hear this because I hear this through clients too. What has been kind of your most favorite project or favorite deliverable that you've worked on, and why? And then what has been your worst and why? Again, what that shows is just flexibility, first of all, and ability to move for, kind of move the needle. There are, we definitely, as individuals, we each have individual passions that we're all like gung ho about it and so excited to get it done. And then we also have these things that tend to be like, oh, I have to do that again. Yes, you do, and you have to trudge through it. But it's how you trudge through it and got to the other side that's really important to clients, and we tend to see those questions a lot.
That's great. I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking we could end up talking about this all day.
I know.
And we're just so grateful for your time, Bailey, and your expertise.
Absolutely.
You see so much that I know that you could talk about this for weeks with us.
I could.
And we have so much to consider. I know each of our participants, what I'm taking away is that we need to continue to refine our resume, to really customize, to make it something that represents us and what we can do to benefit the person that we're trying to impress, the organization
Absolutely.
we're trying to impress. We're really making those specific connections. So that's so
Absolutely.
great. Thank you for your advice.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
To our guests, I hope you're going to stay tuned in for just a couple more minutes to help us out a bit. We want to know how today's workshop will help you. Top takeaway from this session. In the chat, I've posed a prompt. If you don't mind finishing the sentence, because of this program, we really like to know what your key takeaways are. As you do that, I'm going to remind you that you'll receive a recording of this program along with a more complete survey in an email this afternoon. The survey will take less than 3 minutes to fill out, but it really helps us as we develop curriculum to support you and the work that you're doing. This week's programs, the Career Connection Workshop, has been made available at no cost to participants. We hope that you'll consider a donation to the Institute to help us continue to provide services such as this. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat. If you're able to give, we would love it. And last but not least, we'd like to invite you to continue exploring and editing your job search tools like your resume, your Twitter, LinkedIn profiles. Tomorrow, the Journalism Institute will offer an office hour between noon and 1, same time as we've met all week, for additional career coaching or to help with your resume, LinkedIn, or Twitter profiles. You're going to receive an invitation with details by email later this afternoon. It'll include information and a link to join. Be sure that you fill that out if you'd like to attend. Thank you so much, Bailey, and to our guests for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye, everybody.